And so Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I was really fascinated by Dr. Bari's introduction, describing in a nutshell the state that the Ummah finds itself in today. And it reminds me of the situation of the early Muslims in the Meccan crucible, when we had just witnessed the first martyr of Islam, Sumayyah, may Allah be pleased with her. The torture of Sayyidina Bilal, may Allah be pleased with him. The boycott of the community for 2 long, hard years by the Quraysh. The humiliation of the Prophet ﷺ at Taif. And the early Muslims cried out to the heavens, Mata Nasrullah, when is the help of Allah coming? And Allah's promise is everlasting. Nasrum min Allah wa fathun qareeb. Allah's help will come and a speedy victory. And then years later, there is this revelation of the Quran, Surah Al-Fath, the victory. And it starts off with the ringing verses. Inna fatahna laka fatham mubin. I have given you a victory that is manifest. And you expect the revelation to describe a war. You expect the revelation to show a victory. You expect the revelation to show us the annihilation of the enemies of Islam. And yet, what the entire chapter called the victory, Surah Al-Fath, what it deals with is the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. It is the compromises made by the Prophet ﷺ, how he sacrificed short-term goals, like performing the Umrah, like not signing Muhammadur Rasulullah, but Muhammad ibn Abdullah, not starting off with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, but just Bismillah. A prisoner exchange program that was manifestly unjust, and a postponement of any visit for Umrah or for Hajj for at least 10 years. It was the moment that Sayyidina Umar, radiallahu anhu, probably for the first time was on the brink of losing his temper with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah speaks about the sakina, the tranquility that Allah descended on the Muslims. And Allah speaks about the taqwa and said to them, stick to the command of taqwa, of restraint, of discipline, and remember God. And then counterposing this sakina, this tranquility and this taqwa, this restraint that the Muslims imposed upon themselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes what happened in the hearts of the Quraysh that day and says that Allah got up in the hearts of the Quraysh khamiyyah al-jahiliyyah, fanaticism, emotionalism, extremism that comes from the days of ignorance. And if we want to understand part of the reason that we have been unable to muster that sense of leadership and victory, it is because we have made a trade-off in life. We have given to others the sakina and taken for ourselves the hamiyah. We have given them the tranquility to sit wherever they sit and to prosecute their plans. And all we have done in exchange was to be the purveyors of fanaticism, of extremism, of emotionalism. And so, when we call for the help of Allah, and Allah promises us a fathun qareeb, we should not be expecting it to come in the ways in which victories appear to come in a militaristic society. But it comes from going back to the soft power of Islam. Because what else do we have? If the name of our religion is Islam and derives from the word silm, which means peace, then that is our default position. That's the source of our power. If the first attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman, the most merciful, why are we the most harsh? When the mission of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Rahmatul lil Alameen, a mercy unto all humanity, why are we the source of fear for humanity, rightly or wrongly. And if the description of the ummah, of the global Muslim community, is ummatan wasatan, the ummah that occupies the middle ground, that finds the balance and shuns the extremes, why are we playing on the extremes and the edges of society and not occupying the middle ground? Because we have abandoned the soft power of Islam for the allure of hard power, believing we can vanquish, and understanding fath. Because the other meaning of fath, not just victory, it means to open up. That's why we have Surah Fatiha. A victory that does not open up hearts is not a victory. A victory that closes hearts to our message is not a victory. You may have had a spectacular military success in Lebanon, in Iraq, Afghanistan, wherever. But if it has closed the hearts to Islam, what is the victory? And so when people look at Nelson Mandela, so many ask me, are you sure he's not Muslim? And while it's a cute question, it is almost a perverse recognition that what we stand for has been exemplified in someone who does not say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. And we wonder, how is it possible that this man who has never uttered those words can exemplify soft power, can find the balance, can be compassionate, can be the symbol of peace, can reconcile contending factors? Is that not our domain? Do we not have a monopoly on it? And so we ask, are you sure he's not Muslim? And those who do say those words, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, yearn that they had the courage to be the purveyors of soft power. And so Bertolt Brecht, in his play Galileo, says these wonderful words, unhappy is the land that needs a hero. Can you imagine that a country and a community and a society must be so fundamentally unhappy that a hero must emerge? Because the ideal is we should all simply live ordinary lives, never called upon to sacrifice too much, never called upon to give up our lives, never called upon to sit for 27 years in prison. It's a symbol of the unhappiness. And if the ummah finds itself in such strife today, in such siege today, in such unhappiness today, and we're incapable of navigating a path out of it, there is the call for either a hero, a Muslim Nelson Mandela, or a heroic generation. And that, I think, is what it is that we require, a heroic generation across the Muslim world. And Nelson Mandela is known for the battles he fought against apartheid. But every battle that is external starts with a battle that is internal. You cannot lead the African National Congress on a disciplined path of struggle if you have not first won the battle within the African National Congress. There's no place for false unities within an organization. A perspective has to prevail. But we create false unities amongst ourselves. We make the compromises with those on the edge who appropriate our symbols, dress like we dress, speak in our name, pray like we pray, but appropriate our religion in the most pernicious ways. And yet we feel that because they say La ilaha illallah, we owe them a bond of allegiance, and we share our identity with them. And then we wonder, why do they caricature us? Why do they condemn us? Why are they Islamophobic? Because we don't create the contradistinctions. We first distinguish ourselves from the edge, and then we are contra to the edge. Unless we do that, we do not open ourselves to others. And so, what we need, and as I've said, which has almost become a bit of a theme of my visit to Manchester and London, is that we often forget that before Muhammadur Rasulullah was Rasulullah, the messenger of God, he was Al-Amin, the trustworthy. We all teach that to our children. The Prophet's nickname when he was young was Al-Amin, and how when he walked into the haram, they asked him, because they trusted him, to and he put it on the black stone. Look how wonderful he is. But we don't learn the lesson. You cannot have a message that is accepted if you do not have a trust in society. If you have not become Al-Amin first, the trustworthy, whatever else you say, however powerful, however compelling, however true, however good, will fall on infertile ground. Because you have not been able either to be consistent or to slay your own demons first. And that's what Nelson Mandela had to do. He had to slay his personal demons through 27 long years in prison. Discipline himself. Win the battle of perspective within the African National Congress. And only then be able to go out and win the battle against apartheid. And so, the famous speech that Nelson Mandela made before he was sentenced to life imprisonment was how he had fought white domination and he had fought black domination. And so it wasn't just that I have committed myself to fight white domination. It's the domination against me, but it is also the domination that may come from me. Unless your sword is double-edged, you will not be trusted. You've got to slay your own demons. And then he goes on, and he says, these are my ideals, and these are the ideals that I am prepared, that I have agreed to live for and achieve. But if necessary, they are ideals for which I am prepared to die. And we think that the most heroic one is the willingness to die for our beliefs. The difficult one is to live your beliefs. You know how easy it is to die, especially when you have been promised heaven and a whole lot of things that go with it. It's like reaching for the eject button of life. When you don't know what to do, when the prostitutes are walking the street, the bars are open, and all the temptations are, it is harder to be a Muslim in Cape Town and in London than it is to be a Muslim in Jeddah and in Makkah. Because what Allah forbids, the state removes. What Allah orders, the state enforces. Here it is up to our individual strengths to ensure that what Allah forbids, your will must be strong enough to stay away from. What Allah orders, your will must be strong enough to go and do. And so, living your ideals and achieving them was Nelson Mandela's first priority. And even when they did not sentence him to death by hanging, and they put him in prison for life, he understood that even in the solitary confinements of his cell, the image of him sitting in that cell will continue to be a living testament to his ideals. And so, we have inverted a lot of that. If any one of our most known personalities on the television screens who pop up from time to time were to make a similar speech, they'd speak about how important it is to die for your beliefs as the ultimate test. Living for it is absolutely critical, and living in the gray areas of life, living with complexity rather than the black and white of life, is the ultimate that we need to be able to achieve. The other important thing that Nelson Mandela teaches us that gives authenticity is to be able to understand what you are fighting. When you have absolutely no clarity what you are fighting, you personalize the fight. Jews become the enemy. The state becomes the enemy. That person is my enemy. And Nelson Mandela says in his testimony, I wanted people to see that I loved even my enemy, even as I hated the system that drove us apart. And therefore could make the corollary statement that our struggle is not just against apartheid, our struggle is to free blacks as victims and to redeem whites as perpetrators. It's a simple shift of perspective. That once you see your enemy as a system, as a set of institutions, rather than a group of people, even if they are discernible by the color of their skin, the way that they pray, what they eat, how they fight you, how they present themselves to you. When you are able to resist all the time. I read this beautiful part of the Mathnawi of Jalaluddin Rumi, in which, poetically, he speaks about that moment when Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu anhu, was about to slay one of his enemies on the battlefield, and the man spat in his face. And he withdrew his sword and put it in his shield. And you must read it, because Rumi says it so much more poetically. I'll just do the summarized version. And the man says, you're a fool. I will come back tomorrow to fight you on another day. And Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu says to him, had I killed you before you spat in my face, I would have done it for the sake of Allah. But after you spat in my face, I would have done it because you had injured my pride. The ability to distinguish between what is for Allah, what is the system, and what is personal injury, what is for you. And that is what the heroic next generation of Muslims must be able to be masters of. The ability to discern. The embrace of nuance. Living with irony. Because it is ironic that here are all these whites oppressing you, and yet you speak about your ability to embrace them. So that becomes absolutely critical, because what it does is that it leads us to the next thing that Nelson Mandela says, that we are all yearning for a better life, free of the imprisonment of dogma. And that becomes the hallmark of a Nelson Mandela. Strong beliefs, but free of dogma. Strong values, but free of dogma. Having enough certainty to know that he's doing the right thing, but enough doubt to admit other opinions into the conversation. We believe that we must have so much overwhelming certainty that doubt is weak. That those who are doubtful are those who are uncertain. We must be able to embrace enough uncertainty, because too much uncertainty is arrogance. Too much uncertainty leads to hubris. Too much uncertainty leads to wrong decisions. You must have sufficient certainty and sufficient doubt. And again, as he said, and I'm trying to think of his name, not Rumi this time, it will come to me. No one has attained unto faith unless they have first doubted. Who is that? Ghazali, Imam Ghazali. And the ability for us to not see doubt as the antithesis of faith, but the proof of faith. And so, Nelson Mandela was a leader who did not feel the need to act out certainty and not consult anyone, not speak to anyone, not listen to anyone. Can you imagine Nelson Mandela comes out of prison after 27 years. He gets driven from his cell to the balcony of the City Hall in Cape Town. Thousands of people are standing there, and Nelson Mandela makes the speech that says, We will nationalize the mines, and we will nationalize the farms, and we will nationalize the factories and all of those kind of things. Afterwards, we had to sit him down and say, Madiba, the Berlin Wall has fallen. We are now living in a single unipolar world. This is the situation. And Nelson Mandela said, "Why, God, why didn't you tell me? I would never have made that speech." He didn't say, "Wow, who are you to tell me? These things were right when I went into prison. They must still be relevant because our people are poor." That's what he could have said, and no one would have had to argue with him. But because he carried sufficient doubt, we felt free enough to say it to him. Do we feel free enough to say anything to our ulama, to our scholars, to our leaders? Or is respect far more important sometimes than honesty? And those are the important things that I think we need to be able to carry forward. But being free of dogma does not mean being free of belief. Because you must know what you believe. You must know what you stand for. But dogma is taking belief to the nth degree. It's to believe so much because of the fundamental uncertainty of your belief. You can't defend it. You can't articulate it. When confronted with a robust questioner, you fall into cliches. You can't win over. And so all you have left is the recourse to say, I'm right. And I think that that becomes an absolutely important part of leadership in the world that we're in today. When you have that kind of approach to people, that kind of approach to doubt and certainty, that kind of aversion to dogma and so forth, reconciliation becomes important and easy. Inclusivity becomes easy. Can you imagine? South Africa has a flag that has the most colors in the world, 6 colors, shaped in the form of convergence. It takes the main colors of the apartheid flag and the main colors of the liberation flag and puts them together. When in doubt, include. South Africa has probably the longest anthem in the world, far longer than God Save the Queen. And not only does its first 2 verses reflect the liberation anthem, and the last 2 verses, the apartheid anthem, the best parts of it, but it incorporates 5 languages. And none of the verses repeat any of the other verses. When in doubt, be inclusive. People laughed when our constitution said that we recognize 11 official languages. But when you're lying in hospital or fighting for your life in court, you want to do so in the language that you are most comfortable in. You don't want a translator and you don't want another language. People were bewildered when the Bill of Rights of South Africa said all religions are equal. Said, no, but they are only 3% Muslims. We're 80% Christians. And Mandela replied that it is the equal value of God, not the number of people. What if tomorrow the Muslims are 80% and the Christians are 20%? Shall we rewrite the constitution then? Or shall we just do something that is eternal and universal and applicable in all situations? And that was his approach. He once said that the key to preserving the rights of people is to put those rights out of the reach of temporary majorities. Because every government that comes in is a temporary majority. If today the government comes in and loves Muslims and hates gays, then they're a temporary majority. Tomorrow a government comes in, hates Muslims and loves gays. They change the constitution again. Tomorrow another government comes in, loves Jews, hates Muslims and hates gays. You find yourself in the same boat. We mustn't find ourselves following a fashion of who we love today and who we hate tomorrow and who we enshrine today and who we exclude tomorrow. It is simply to ask, is our core value equality of people? Are our human rights applicable to all? Do we give dignity to everyone? And if the answer is yes, on all of those scores, then you don't have to embrace the lifestyle of anyone that you give rights to. You don't even have to approve of it. You can even retain the right to speak against it and raise your family in a particular way. But don't open a door of discrimination to others that you hate today, because someone else, a temporary majority, will come in who will hate you and use your permission to enshrine hate and use it against you. And that's the other hallmark of authentic leadership: consistency. I was asked, what advice will I give to the Muslims of New York who want to build a mosque in 911 in the context of burning the Quran and so forth? I said, if I could say anything to Imam Raouf, who I love very much, I will say to him, the path to building a mosque in New York is to fight for a church in Saudi Arabia. Because the fact of the matter is, when you demand something as a minority, do you give it where you're a majority? Can you ask for something when you are powerless, but not give it to others when you are powerful? And so we all have these very theological debates about the haram and the proximity to that and the holy lands and shouldn't we that and the other. And we don't give the same ability to do gymnastics to our opponents who don't want us to put up a minaret in Switzerland, or they want us to build our mosque-like factories in Germany and all of those kind of things. They also have lots of red tape, planning decisions that they can explain to us ad nauseum. Why are ours superior? And so consistency of leadership is absolutely critical. And therefore, to come to the issue that Farouk raised, the notion of the Aqaba. Because leadership, this heroic generation of leaders that we are looking for, must understand that imitation and following is not going to do the trick for us. We are in a world today where orthodoxy is effectively in inertia. It doesn't know how to go forward. It's just jerking on the same space. It doesn't have the tools to think its way out of this. It doesn't know what to do with this era of social media, this era of ICTs, which bring every belief we have, brings it into doubt. So much so that we must retreat into one belief that God exists. They don't know what to do with a generation that is socialized more through MTV and social media than we can ever do, even as parents or as madrasas. Orthodoxy is in inertia because when the imam stands in the mihrab and sees the musallis getting older and the young people not coming, he knows he's in trouble, never mind if he speaks better English the next day. And that has become the feeding ground. The inertia of orthodoxy has become the feeding ground for the nihilism of the extremists. They know that the rump of Islam is not giving guidance, and they feed off the discontent and the need for guidance with a siren song of easy solutions and extremism and the ejection button to Jannah. So, where does this next generation of heroic leaders come to? It has to draw from orthodoxy, because orthodoxy remains the repository of the accumulated wisdom of Islam. It has to rescue the maqasid, the objectives, the impulses, the intents, and the goals of our deen. It has to rescue the maqasid al-sharia from orthodoxy, not cede it to the extremists and to be able to do something different to it and with it. And to be able to say, if the objective of dress in Islam is modesty, then everything else is style. That when we live in a world that we live in today, we must choose between maximum expression of Islam or minimum compliance. Because some of us want to go into every society we go into and want maximum expression. Sometimes maximum expression is the niqab. Sometimes maximum expression is wearing your thobe to work. Sometimes maximum expression is having an hour lunch so that you can do dhuhr and another 20 minutes off for asr and another half an hour off for maghrib and so forth. We've got to be able to work out ways to live where we don't make the rules, by rescuing the objectives of our faith from the body of orthodoxy and not ceding our faith to the emergent voices on the edge. And unless we have the courage to do that battle, we don't qualify for leadership. Because in Surah Buruj, Surah Balad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges us. Allah says that I've given you these two eyes and I've given you this tongue and I've shown you the two ways. فَلَقَتَّحَمَ الْأَقَبَةِ. But why do you not ascend the path that is steep? وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْأَقَبَةِ. How can I describe to you what this aqaba is? The steep path is. And then Allah says, it's the freeing of the slave, it's feeding in the day of hunger, it's looking after the orphan, doing all the things that doesn't even begin to touch making salah, and you must do that. I'm just saying it is not, that's the easy path, believe it or not. And then Allah concludes the argument, ثُمَّ كَانَ مِنَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Then you are of those who believe. وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Then you are of those who enjoin patience. وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْمَرْحَمَةِ. Then you are the people of compassion and you are the companions of the right hand. So the next generation of leadership are the leaders that must carve a middle path between the inertia of orthodoxy and the nihilism of fundamentalism, of fundamentalist extremism, and to ascend the aqaba and to get onto the steep path in which to give leadership. And therefore, if you watch the film Long Walk to Freedom and you see Nelson Mandela arguing with his fellow leaders of the African National Congress about negotiating, he says, I've listened to you, I am your leader, and this is the way in which we are going to go forward. Do we have the courage to listen to everyone and then do what is right? That's what the next generation has to understand and what will qualify them for leadership. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.